We're taking you to Tel Aviv, where Trent Murray, SABC News correspondent, is joining us live now to speak about this and, of course, the deepening humanitarian crisis that continues there to unfold in Gaza. Trent, good evening to you and thank you so much for your time. There was a commemoration event here in Johannesburg. Anything planned that side?
Well, good evening to you. Yeah, look, many commemoration services taking place across Israel today, as you might imagine. The first ones began at exactly 6:29 a.m. this morning. Now, that marks 1 year since Hamas first began to launch its attack down to the minute. Those commemoration services taking place in some of the towns and villages that were attacked by the militants. And we have also seen Israel's President Isaac Herzog down there taking part in some of those. Just as we go to where we know another separate event is taking place right now, commemorating the Nova Music Festival. Now, you might remember that was a big party essentially that was taking place, a festival not far from Gaza on October 7th last year, and it was one of the sites of some of the worst atrocities that we saw. Close to 380 people were killed, many of them young people that have been attending that festival, and so many of their friends and families will be taking part in those commemoration services. As I say, they're just beginning quite shortly actually, but of course this comes amongst pretty heavy security, as you might imagine. There's been several sirens over the course of the day interrupting some of those services. Rockets were launched by both Hamas in Gaza but also Hezbollah in Lebanon, and just in the past hour or so a major siren alert here across all of Tel Aviv, with the army saying the Houthi in Yemen fired a ballistic missile towards Israel, but it was shot down by the country's air defense system.
And what is the latest then in that regard?
Well, we know that security had always been on high alert today amid fears that sort of militant or terror groups could try to use today as a draw for enacting more violence, and of course with so many civilians out on the street taking part in these ceremonies. But I think just fighting is, continuing pretty heavily up in Lebanon, which is why you're seeing Hezbollah continue to fire those rockets. We saw some of those make impact today in Haifa, which is the third largest city of Israel. But of course, we're also following a desperate situation in Lebanon itself. Close to 2,000 people have now been killed up there amongst the fighting, the 1,000 of them in the past 2 weeks alone. And that comes as the IDF says it's going to be sending in more troops following its earlier decision to launch that ground invasion, and yet more airstrikes also hitting Lebanon, including one earlier today very close to the airport in the capital, Beirut.
And I suppose, as you know, of course, we talk about these developments now. There's also still that humanitarian crisis that continues to unfold in Gaza.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well over 41,000 Palestinians have now been killed in Gaza, according to the health ministry, and humanitarian groups continue repeatedly to sound the alarm over the situation on the ground, everything from food and malnutrition to healthcare, and also just the fact that for many Palestinians on the ground, it appears there's just nowhere safe now for them to take shelter, given the bombardment and given that Israel is really operating across all areas of the Strip. I mean, Hamas, I think today probably reminded Israel that even 1 year after that bombardment and heavy fighting, that they do still have some rockets in their arsenal, and they are able to fire them off into Israel. And you would imagine then in response Israel will return fire, which will make the situation on the ground, it'll just elongate it really and make it terrible for the civilians on the ground who are trying to endure this.
And of course we saw on X just about an hour ago Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu putting on his account there that they will never forget the fallen, and of course there's the United States as well. President Joe Biden saying that him and the Vice President remain fully committed to the safety of the Jewish people and the rights of Israel to exist. But one then asks the question, how are ordinary Israelis responding to all of this that is currently taking place?
Well, look, I think for many people this is a pretty dark day of sorrow, remembering what happened. I mean, this was the worst attack on people of the Jewish faith since the Holocaust, and I think for many of them today is a day remembering exactly just how shaken they were 1 year ago. I mean, the entire sort of foundation of Israel and its security was hit pretty hard that day. I mean, they certainly caught Israeli security by surprise, the Hamas militants, that is. And I think for many today, yes, they are reflecting on what happened 1 year ago, but they also have questions about the direction of the country and where all this is heading. You know, I mean, Israel is now fighting on multiple fronts: Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, the Houthi in Yemen, and of course the big shadow overhanging all of this is Iran, following that big ballistic missile attack last week. So I think it's understandable many people in this country, whilst understanding that Israel needs to maintain its deterrence and also its security in order to protect its people, they do genuinely also worry about the direction of travel, particularly if Israel gets embroiled in a wider war with Iran, which will widely be expected to be very deadly for both sides.
All right, Trent, thank you so much for that update. That was Trent Murray, the SABC News correspondent.